All right. Well, welcome everyone to our latest Capital Connection webinar. My name is Bo Brockett. I'm the communications coordinator for the Michigan Environmental Council. I'm filling in for Conan Smith today, our usual host, who's our president and CEO. Unfortunately, due to the storms yesterday, he's been having a lot of power issues, so I'll be stepping in for him. Really appreciate all you folks that are in the audience too for still joining us today, despite the storms. I know even if for those of us who were fortunate enough to have power after them, that tree issues, et cetera, can cause a lot of strife in the hours after. So appreciate you taking your time to join us today. I'm joined by Matt Penniman of the League of Michigan Bicyclists. And as you might expect, we're here today to talk about biking in the state of Michigan, where it's at currently in terms of its culture, its infrastructure, its excitement, and then where we think and want it to go in the future. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much to MEC for inviting us.
Yeah, you are welcome. As we usually start with these webinars, would you mind just kind of introducing yourself and your organization and kind of how you came into the space that you work in now?
Sure. So I'm the Communications and Advocacy Director for the League of Michigan Bicyclists. We are the statewide advocacy organization that works to improve life through bicycling. And that's improving life for everyone, not just people who ride a bike. Because we know that moving from car travel to bike travel gives us cleaner air, less congestion on our roads, and a stronger community. I got to LMB through a kind of a twisty route. I worked for nonprofits. I worked for a marketing company in Old Town Lansing. I worked briefly for Michigan State University, but my passion has always been communications and advocating for a strong response to climate change and addressing the climate crisis. And I'm glad that LMB has been part of that.
That's wonderful. And one of my favorite, I was really excited for this webinar in particular, just because of my own personal kind of the way I entered the environmental space myself. I've always been, or long have been, a bit of a geek when it comes to creating like good communities. It was like urban planning was kind of how I came into the environmental space. It was my interest in that. And so the transportation side of things, while it hasn't been something I've dived into much, in my own line of work, it's something that it's always interested me. So very excited to have this webinar with you today. When we were promoting this webinar, I was thinking to naturally with my line of work, all of the news that has kind of come out around one, just the environment in general. There's been a lot of talk about climate change in Michigan, especially, where there's a lot of positive movement on that front. But then also, like the future of Michigan itself, it's how its population currently is stagnating and how we might make Michigan a better place for people to live in. And in both of those lines of conversation, climate and in population, transportation does get mentioned in both of them quite a bit. And I've noticed an uptick in that in the news. I'm wondering if you're noticing something similar, and then second, if you would you maybe mind explaining the state of bicycling in Michigan, and if we're at a moment right now that feels a little bit different than it has been in the past?
Sure, I think we are at a moment of transformation. I don't necessarily have a lot of data to back that up, but I can tell you what we see is that a lot of people started bicycling again in the pandemic. And a lot of people realized how much good it could do for them, for their physical health, for their mental health. At the same time, we've seen kind of a transformation in the hobby side of bicycling as well, where more road bicyclists are shifting toward gravel or trail riding to get away from hazardous drivers. Distracted driving is still a very significant concern for people who ride bikes. But we are seeing it more people in cities that are embracing bicycling as an important part of the transportation mix, as a way that they can get around, as a way that their neighbors can get around. And in part, I think that's because e-bikes are taking off. Electric bikes are outselling electric cars in the United States right now. And partly because they're a lot more affordable. Partly because they keep all the most fun parts of bicycling and help mitigate some of the less fun parts, like struggling up a hill while you're carrying a kid on the back or carrying your groceries in pannier bags. Having that motor assist when you need it, like on a really hot day when you don't want to be sweating and struggling in high humidity, can really make the difference in being able to rely on a bike for transportation versus just using it when it's convenient. So I do see Michigan at a bit of an inflection point where bikes have always been part of the transportation scene, but I think more and more people are taking them seriously as here is a real part of the paradigm that could replace some of the polluting car traffic that we see in Michigan right now.
That's great. And I'd imagine too, just having ridden a bike many times myself, that there's also a sense of freeness when you are able to bike to a place rather than drive, in terms of maybe a little bit less stress if you're fortunate enough to have a nice path there.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of natural joy too. You and I both know, and I'm sure a lot of the folks in this webinar today know, that our infrastructure, as great as this culture shift, as you mentioned, has been, is maybe not quite up to snuff with that culture shift, both in terms of the infrastructure we need to build out when it comes to being able to create good biking routes, but also the current infrastructure that we have. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the state of infrastructure specifically in Michigan and maybe what some of its challenges are.
So it's getting better, but it's not there yet. Safety is still a really huge issue for people who ride bikes. From 2020 to 2022, 103 bicyclists were killed in Michigan. And that was an increase of 64% over the previous 3-year period. And there's recent research that shows that SUVs and large pickup trucks are more dangerous for bicyclists in a crash than sedans. And they also are making up more and more of the vehicles on the road as car makers shift production toward those models. They're more profitable, they're more pricey. I can understand why they're making them, but it's not necessarily good for the safety of people who walk and bike. So infrastructure is really the key intervention that's going to make our roads safer, more pleasant to ride on, more of a real option for people to get around. And Michigan is making progress, but we still are tending to treat safe access for bicyclists as kind of a nice bonus instead of as an essential component. So if you think about it, how many major destinations within 5 miles of your house could you reach and feel safe doing it? How many of those could you get to without having to ride on a road that feels too dangerous to do on a daily basis? For a lot of folks, it's impossible to travel even 5 miles without encountering those high-risk roads. There was a recent study that came out, I just saw today, looking percentage-wise in different cities, how many people would face extremely risky roads if they tried to do a 20-minute bike commute. And in many cities, including like Detroit, it was like 60%, 65%. The best cities get that down to around 40%. Ideally, it would be down to 20 or 10%, so that it would really be a solid option for everyone. We don't think everyone needs to ride a bike. We just wanted everyone to have it as an option if that's what they choose to do. And there's also a good illustration of this in MDOT's plan for the next 5 years that they've put out, the 5-year transportation program. And that's available for public comment until September 8th. They have complete streets and multimodal as one of their focus areas, but there's still not a lot of detail on their planned non-motorized investments. They don't have a total sum of how much they're going to invest in non-motorized, for instance. They don't have non-motorized projects broken out from road projects. So we want to see that culture change, and we want to see safety and safe infrastructure as a priority across the state.
That's great. And I will drop that link. I know that the League of Michigan Bicyclists actually has a nice guide of sorts that folks can use. So I'll be sure to share that in the chat later on today, maybe when we talk a little bit about solutions. We
wrote a comment kind of going page by page through the transportation program document. And I would encourage folks to take a look at that document. It really is an interesting look at where Michigan is planning to take our roads over the next 5 years. it has some shortcomings, which we are trying to address in that comment. But it does represent some significant thought and effort by MDOT. We just want to see them take it a little farther.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, this might have to be an anecdotal answer for you, but I'm wondering if, if you're also seeing a shift in recognition of, the need to make some more structural changes among people, within who have like a bit more of positions of power within our governments, whether they be local or statewide.
Yeah, so the US Department of Transportation has started to promote a safe system approach, and we see MDOT recognizing that and taking that up. And that safe system approach is really about addressing every component, from drivers to vehicles to roads to speeds, post-crash care, and making each element safer so that when one element fails, when you have a driver who's distracted or sleepy or intoxicated even, the whole system doesn't fail and kill somebody.
One last question that came to mind from my end on this topic was, when you think about people who are apprehensive to ride a bike, or who maybe are not even really thinking about, it's not even crossed their minds whether they want to ride a bike to get to places, whether for fun or for, for more utility. Have you anecdotally noticed any sorts of threads? Is the worry safety? Is it something else?
I think the worry is primarily safety. I'm not sure what else. I do think sometimes people are concerned with weather, but once folks try out bike riding, I think they can tend to see that most weather is okay weather for bicycling. Like the severe storm we had last night in this area, no one should be out in a car or a bike. But in most cases, 95% of the time, if you can drive in it, you can bike in it.
That's a great point. That's a great point. We've talked a little bit about the state of things as they are currently. It's good parts, it's bad parts. I'd like to shift us now a little bit toward the future. The League of Michigan Bicyclists are, like one of the leading advocates for better pedestrian safety, better bicyclist safety in the state of Michigan. I'm wondering if you maybe would mind explaining a little bit of some of the shifts that you think should happen within our state, whether they be at a statewide or more local level.
Sure. I think one of the shifts is building a broader constituency for non-motorized infrastructure. There's a saying in bike advocacy that you can't decide where to build a bridge by counting the number of people swimming across the river. Until you have a safe option for bicyclists to use, you can't necessarily know what the demand would be if you did have that option. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. I'm really hoping that as we see e-bikes grow in popularity, as we see more people riding e-bikes for transportation, that will shift the balance, that will build the constituency for safe places to ride, safe routes, and in turn, kind of light a fire under political people, local and statewide, to really invest in that infrastructure network. We have a policy called Complete Streets in Michigan. We have PA 51 that requires expenditure of 1% of state funding on non-motorized infrastructure. Thank you for mentioning that in the chat. There are pieces out there, but sometimes they tend to fall by the wayside. A city will pass a complete streets policy and then 10 years go by and they haven't really done anything with it. They haven't kept it updated. They haven't checked in with it as they're planning their major projects. So we want to see folks look at best practices for complete streets, look at where their network of safe bike infrastructure is and where they need to invest in closing gaps in that network rather than just investing in recreational pieces, and try to take more of a holistic safe system approach.
That's great. And I know I feel like we've maybe partly answered this already, but why is this moment right now, so important to kind of get these processes and these changes in place more than maybe, let's say, any other moment in the past? Is there a reason why this moment stands out?
Sure. I think this moment stands out in part because we are in a climate crisis, and um, decarbonizing transportation is going to be a huge challenge. The amount of lithium, for example, that we will have to mine to make EV batteries if we want to replace all our current gas-powered cars and trucks with electric-powered cars and trucks that are exactly the same size and get the same range. That's just a huge undertaking. Not to say it can't be done, but it'll take time, and time is something that we don't really have. So I think this is a crucial moment for bicycling because it does have a big role to play in quickly decarbonizing transportation. And changing how we use our land, how we plan for transportation, we could really rapidly reduce the carbon intensity of transportation through a shift to e-bikes and e-scooters and other forms of human scale mobility. From a carbon intensity perspective, e-bikes are about twice as efficient per passenger mile as a bus, about 5 times as efficient as an electric car, and about 10 times as efficient as gasoline cars. So here's an example from a study by Thea Riafrancos looking at lithium demand. Her team found that they could model out lithium demand through 2050. And by decreasing car dependency, right-sizing EV batteries, and making a robust recycling system, they could show a reduction in lithium demand by up to 92%. Part of that is just because the size of battery that you put in an EV matters a lot. The number of passengers that EV can carry matters a lot. So, a bus can carry a lot more people than an F-150 or a Hummer. But the weight of the vehicle matters even more. So an e-bike that weighs 70 pounds is going to take a whole lot less battery to move at 40 miles than an EV that weighs 4,000 pounds. So I think we can really minimize the environmental impact of lithium mining and maximize the speed of transition that we can get out of a given year's production volume by enabling more of that production, more of those resources to go to low impact forms of transportation like e-bikes instead of relying entirely on electric cars. When we had the transition from horsepower to gasoline power, those first gasoline powered cars looked basically like horse-drawn carriages. And then as time went on, car design evolved, they became their own thing. Right now, we're going through a similar scale transition from gasoline power to electric power. The first electric cars look exactly like gasoline powered cars, but there's so much more space for different kinds of transportation to emerge in this ecosystem, and for the future of electric vehicles to look very different from the past of gasoline powered vehicles. I think e-bikes are going to be part of that. I think they're going to be a big part of it, bigger than most people realize.
Yeah, and I have to say, when you shared these slides, and we just had a conversation prior to this webinar, it was a really eye-opening moment for me, just to see the impact that e-bikes, e-scooters, et cetera, can have. And as we discussed too, although the extraction and the production of fossil fuels, in terms of its impact, will far surpass any, lithium mining. If we can limit lithium mining from that perspective alone, why not do that? I thought that was a really great example.
It's still, even with a big lithium battery on an EV Hummer, it's still better to have that on a battery than, pulling fossil fuels out of the ground.
Yeah.
But from an efficiency perspective, if you have to move one person and their stuff, why not do it on an e-bike instead of on a multi-ton vehicle?
Exactly. I do want to make sure we share this other slide too that you had shared with me.
Oh yeah.
It shows a little bit of the range of some e-bikes, e-scooters, and e-mopeds. And I thought this was just as much an eye-opening experience to see, because my perception of e-bikes and e-scooters has always been, where I live in downtown Lansing, it's people going across downtown, not really going much farther outside of it. But this really changed my perception of it. It shows that if we have the right infrastructure in place, these can be used for far more, range than what I initially thought.
Yeah. And so this is just a circle. I gave a presentation in Ann Arbor about sustainable micromobility. And so looking from that spot at the College of Engineering and University of Michigan out 40 to 50 miles, how far could you go? You could get pretty far. The black circle is if you have to go round trip and get back to Ann Arbor before you run out of battery. The white circle is if you can go somewhere and charge there and then come back. So one way out, one way back. So this points out that we're going to need e-bike charging stations as well as EV car charging stations. And those are very common in China, which is a little bit farther down the EV transition curve than we are, because you don't need as much power, as much juice to charge an e-bike as you do an electric car. So they're relatively easy to purchase, to finance, to set up, but you need to do it. You need to make them accessible. You need to make the payment part easy, and then you can have a network where people can go to their destination, plug in their e-bike, do what they need to do, and bike home. And they can really make a pretty significant trip if the infrastructure is there to support it.
That's great. And I think this picture and this discussion really pairs well with a question that was asked by Brad Garderman of the Office of Outdoor Recreation Industry. He's wondering if unpaved hiking and biking trails networked through communities, such as on rights of ways, can be a potentially viable off-road or climate-friendly option for accessing the things we need to access, like parks and schools. When you're thinking about, cross-community or community-to-community sorts of transportation, are those part of the equation for the League of Michigan Bicyclists?
Yes. The question of using natural surface trails, unpaved trails, for transportation is a bit of a thorny one, because you're inviting more traffic on them. You're inviting traffic that might be optimized for carrying passengers and cargo, like a three-wheel e-trike, and those trails are not necessarily designed for that use. I think it's certainly a possibility if you're talking about a wider trail that might be paved with crushed limestone or some other kind of improvement, but a pure unimproved more mountain bike style trail is probably not going to be suitable for regular reliable transportation. I see, by the way, that we also have a question on DNR plans to allow e-mountain bikes on trails. It was discussed at a panel event. We have seen some draft language. We have submitted our comments. We have not received a substantive response to those comments yet, and we are pushing DNR to give us more response to us and more of a timeline of where they're going. But those plans are still in the works. They have not been dropped or forgotten. I see Brad is also asking, is non-motorized still the right term for this desired infrastructure? Maybe micromobility infrastructure is a broader term. The whole question of what to call these things is really, I think, an interesting one. I would just say infrastructure that supports people who walk, bike, and roll, because we need to focus on the people using the system, and infrastructure that scales to a human scale and human-powered speeds, with maybe some minor assistance, rather than infrastructure that scales to motor vehicles with hundreds of horsepower.
Great. I know we're getting a little bit close to time here, so I do want to ask, just with all this talk about what, biking can be in Michigan in the near and far future, I'm wondering if any movers and shakers in Michigan, or any of just us more, local advocates, regular advocates, could have any like good communities that they can use as like a way to, I don't know, inspire others, or to use as a reference for like what this landscape could be like.
Yeah, I think more Michigan communities are putting in protected bike lanes, and that to me is the key intervention. Protected bike lane that has a physical barrier or separation from motor vehicle traffic is going to be far safer and more comfortable for people of all ages and abilities to use, as long as it's designed well, as long as there's careful attention played to intersection design. And there are communities that are doing those. Fenton would be a big one. Oh, sorry, I mean Ferndale. I'm sorry, Ferndale would be a big one. If you check out what the Woodward Avenue project that's going on in Ferndale right now, that is a huge reform to a major road to make it more friendly to people using it as biking and walking. Check out ferndalemoves.com. Their mayor, Melanie Piana, has really done a fantastic job and speaks very eloquently about getting community engagement at every stage, and really bringing in attention on putting safety over convenience, safety for people over convenience for cars, and making sure that everybody has equal access to get where they need to go, whether they drive or not. Kalamazoo has made some great strides. They've opened a new protected lane. They have realized that the business owners downtown want people to stop and shop, and people on a bike are going to have a far easier time doing that than a driver that's whizzing through at 35, 40 miles an hour. Ann Arbor has put in protected bike lanes. They are working on addressing the people parking in the bike lanes problem. That's a thorny problem for sure, but they're working on it. They're also working on keeping those clean with the street sweeper. One community that I don't think people realize is a great model is Mackinac Island. It is the biggest, the best bicycling utopia in the state and possibly in the country. And if you want to see what a bike-friendly future could feel like, visit Mackinac Island and think about how all those people are getting around safely with no traffic lights, no stop signs, and no exhaust other than the smell of horse dung.
I have to say, I went to Mackinac for the very first time. I'm a bad Michigander. It took me 26 years to do it, but I went for the first time this summer, and it was just floored. It was so cool to see that. To wrap up our webinar, I know we're just about at the hour, but I want to make sure that I give folks here and you a chance to talk about like what we can do as people to kind of help this cause, help this movement. And I know you have a few things that are going on at the league itself. Would you mind describing those?
Sure. Well, we're seeing the legislative session coming up soon, and we have a few advocacy things we're preparing for in the fall legislative session. So one of those is pushing Michigan to take a more asset management approach to collecting data about this micromobility infrastructure, the same way we do with roads for the Transportation Asset Management Council. We'll have more to share on that soon. For right now, I would really encourage folks to take our survey. We're doing a cycling census survey of everyone who rides a bike in the state. That's at lmb.org/survey. And also share our call to comment on the MDOT 5-year transportation program. We would really love to see MDOT put more of a priority on safety and demonstrate that priority in this document, in their 5-year transportation program. Right now, they are not on track with the Towards Zero Deaths goals that they've set in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. 31 more people were killed last year than their goal. And if you think about those 31 deaths, that's significant. So we want to push them to do more to put that safe system approach in place, to talk about how they're doing it, to make commitments, and to let us hold them accountable for doing that. So you shared that link. I would encourage people to go there, read our comment. You don't have to agree with us, but we would encourage you to make your own comment. And we have a take action button that you can use to edit a template and send it in, or you can visit their webpage and make a comment of your own by September 8th. I know those are the major things. Oh, and also I would offer, if folks are interested in learning more about what LMB does, as a little thank you for participating in this webinar today, we'd love to share with you a copy of our upcoming Michigan Bicyclist magazine. We have some great stories in there. We did an interview with Larry Bell on beer bicycling in Michigan. So there's a link that Bo's going to share to a form. If you would like to give us your address, we'll add you to our mailing list for this issue of the magazine. It's an LMB member benefit, so all of our members will receive it, our donors and event participants. But if you would like to get a copy as well, we'd be happy to send you one.
Thank you so much, Matt. And so folks know, for those watching live, I put those links right in our chat. If you're watching a recording of this webinar, just go to the description in our video and you'll be able to find most of those links as well. We'll also send out a follow-up email either tonight or tomorrow morning for those watching live that'll have these links and then some other resources such as the recording of the webinar itself and some information from some other member groups of ours that also have some great transit and transportation initiatives underway.
Bo, let me interrupt. I think you sent the links to host and panelists rather than to everyone. So if you could, actually, I can see if I can copy and paste them.
Great, thank you for that catch. I have a copy and pasted right now. So
there we go. Thank you.
Thanks, folks, for calling me out on that. That means I've been talking to myself essentially the whole time because I've been commenting a little bit. Well, thank you. Well, in that case, then I know we're a little bit past the hour. So, Matt, thanks so much for taking the time today. Before I let you go, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the folks in the audience?
Well, let me take just a moment to look at the Q&A here. So one person asked, what communities across Michigan would you say have made the most progress on non-motorized infrastructure? Detroit actually has made a huge amount of progress. They are now far more cycling friendly than many of their suburbs, far more cycling friendly than many other major US cities. They have done a good job. They have more room to improve, but as far as progress, Detroit has made a ton of progress. John asks, many bike lanes are right next to multi-lane roads with heavy truck and passenger traffic. Tire emissions are still a health concern. Are there standards as to safe distances between traffic and bike lanes? There are no set standards. Tire emissions are a concern. We are thinking about advocating for stronger regulation on tires and the kind of particulate emissions that tires put out. That is a longer range thing. Those standards as to safe distances are set in design guides, like the one from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, and the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, or AASHTO, is getting ready to issue a new set of design guides. But I would say the standard for safe distance is far more based on avoiding impact from a motor vehicle than on avoiding air quality issues from tire or exhaust emissions. If tire emissions are a concern for you, an N95 filtration mask can actually go a long way. It does not look especially cool or normal to be wearing one while you're bicycling, but if you have a lot of heavy traffic, consider wearing an N95 while you ride. Are there e-bike charging standards? Yes. Most chargers plug into a standard household volt port, but those are not always available in public places for people to plug in their e-bikes to. So it's really making sure that you can get access to a standard outlet. If you have to pay for the time to do that, then set up a charging mechanism for folks to pay. And you, of course, have to be able to lock up your bike next to the outlet if you want to leave it there to charge while you do other things. Patrick Affolter asks about, is LMB doing anything to educate e-bike users and rental outlets about the distinctions between class 1, 2, and 3? Yes, we are preparing an e-bike rack card that we are making available to e-bike shops and rental locations that lays out the distinction between class 1, 2, and 3. There's also a video series that's coming from People for Bikes that lays out this distinction, and we're getting ready to do a promotional push around that. So look for that within the next few weeks. Were there any other questions that I missed? I don't see any.
I don't believe so. Let me check the chat real quick while we're going through here. We have one final question in the chat, if you want to answer that.
I think e-bikes kind of sell themselves. If you give people a chance to ride one, they will rapidly understand what is fun and enjoyable and cool about it. People ride bikes for fun already, a lot more than they drive for fun. I think that enthusiasm and buy-in can come from sharing bike joy, from sharing how good you feel about getting to ride a bike, and from the community connections. I ride a cargo e-bike, a rad wagon, to do errands, to drop my kids off to school. And I've noticed in my neighborhood, more people getting e-bikes and trying them out because they see you riding around and be like, oh, that looks kind of fun. And it is fun. Thank you for the mention of the Top of Michigan Trails Council video. I will check that out. Thank you. I do think getting the momentum going, building infrastructure can be a self-sustaining process if we get it past that tipping point. And I think we're getting close. You know, we've heard from national folks that once you have a 50% complete bike network, enough people will use it that you'll be able to push through the other 50%. It's getting to that first 50% that is the real challenge. So I would encourage you to think about your community as a challenge to get to 50% completion and to build the coalition, to build the community of riders that will then power you through from 50 to 100. Thank you all for your time today.
What a great way to close it, Matt. Thanks so much for taking the time to answer those questions at the end. And thank you all too for sticking around with us again through the storms and then past a little bit of our time today. Really appreciate all you all. Again, we'll send out a follow-up email with a link to this recording with some resources, and then we can get you going. So again, thanks, Matt, and then thanks everyone attending today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, and a note about this picture. Thanks to the city of Detroit for hosting the Detroit Bike Summit last Saturday and inviting LMB to come set up a table. We had a great time. The Motown Trail Bangers led a great ride through the neighborhoods to see different murals around the city. It was such a beautiful afternoon.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, you all. Appreciate it.